Hey, how's it going, Connor?
It's going good. How are you, Rob?
Pretty good. I have a question for you.
Oh yeah.
What advice would you give to new screenwriters?
Well, I am a new screenwriter myself, so take it with as many grains of salt as that deserves. But I think it's tricky with writing screenplays because they're a sort of secondary document from the artwork that is intended to be made. It's like uh, where normal works of art are a kind of like empty architecture that you invite an audience in to occupy and to fill and have an experience with. A screenplay sort of plans for that architecture, so it requires a kind of double buy-in with the audience, where they have to agree to imagine the architecture and then agree to enter the architecture. So it's a pretty high bar to clear in terms of getting in there. And I think why our project was possible, why you were able to imagine a movie from my story, was because I had already put it into a concrete form as a comic. And so I think having a concrete form to a story really helps. And so the bits of advice I would have that kind of carry from that are to not wait for permission or um, for the go ahead from somebody else to make your story. Like make it however you can, and make it real in the world. And what makes that possible in, I think, all artistic realms is having a supportive community around you. So I think it's maybe sequentially, you build your community and then you don't ask for permission, you just go ahead and make the thing. And I think that's a lesson I've learned as a self-publisher in comics, um, as a musician, like release, my band's releasing our own records and things like that. um, and it seemed to ring true in the experience I had in watching you make this film, because you have this supportive community that you've built up around you over what, 20 plus years you've been out in LA in the film industry. And so that segues into a question that I have for you, Rob, which is, uh, I know it wasn't easy to make this film, and you tried to get the big Hollywood money behind it, but you ultimately decided to go ahead and do it by any means you could, as a sort of small budget film. Um, so how hard was that? How hard or how easy was that for you?
Um, uh, it wasn't an easy shoot, but I think with careful planning, you go in kind of anticipating challenges, and you hope that when you cut corners, that you're cutting the right corners that allow you to execute a vision that is true to the script and true to the original story and all of that. So it was great to work with Matthew Rudenberg, a cinematographer that I've had a lot of experience working with. And to create the look, we tried to come up with something that would work for our schedule and our limitations. So that meant keeping things pretty simple. We didn't have the luxury of time to shoot, very complicated setups. So kind of working with what we had, we tried to focus on composition and framing and basic lighting and create a look that was achievable in 19 days. Another challenge was that a lot of the film takes place in a facility, which was our most expensive location. So we couldn't afford to stay there very long. So a good percentage of the movie was shot in those 5 or 6 days, where we were shooting 8 to 10 pages a day, which is a little uncomfortable for actors and directors, but and cinematographers. But ultimately, that plan made what would have been a very difficult shoot slightly less difficult. But if I were to give anybody advice, it's just that try and anticipate the obstacles and address them before before you're on set, and you know, be ambitious. I have a follow-up question for you. If when you approach writing a new screenplay, would you jump right in, or would you try and write like a short story, or have some material to begin with that you could adapt in the same way that you did the graphic novel?
I don't know. I think like, yeah, it's really hard to say. Well, I feel like every time I start a new project, like it's always like a new method. Like I've never made a comic in the same way twice.
Mm-hmm.
Even like the different volumes of the Generous Bosom comic on which Ultrasound was based, like the working method, how I planned pages, how I drew them, changed drastically sometimes between volumes. So it's hard to say. I feel like each project has its own kind of logic in terms of how, and that, yeah, there's always like a threshold past which like you feel like you have a grasp on it. And so yeah, I think probably there needs yeah, for me at least, there needs to be some other thing, but I'm not sure if it necessarily needs to be like a fully written out story or another comic or something like that, because it was really fun to compose story, to find story like on just writing the script. I found that to be really intoxicating in working on Ultrasound. Like it feels it's like a very fun, imaginative space to be in, because it's like anything can happen. And I think sometimes when I'm planning a comic or something like that, I'm like, oh well, do I really want to draw a car? Like, oh, you know. But if you're writing, you just be like, a car drives by, you know, and that's all you have to think about, at least at that moment. So I think, yeah, writing is a sort of like pretty free space to create in that I do enjoy. Yeah.
Did you like the obstructions going in? I know we talked about page count and
Yeah.
certain things that, like, you know, hey, there's no way we can get a 200-page script made.
Yeah.
Was that a good thing, or?
Yeah, absolutely.
For you?
Yeah, it sort of it kind of like gives you some friction to move against, for sure. I really liked that. And yeah, I think my favorite part of making comics too is always like kind of the layout phase. And that I really love, like solving the problems of being like, oh, I want this and this to happen on this page, but I want this to happen after the page turn. So I have to like rearrange or like stretch this moment out, shrink this moment to like get the timing right. And the script writing stuff felt like that kind of problem solving in this really fun way, where you're like, you get to the end and we're 20 pages over or whatever. So it's like, what can we take out? And that becomes a very fun puzzle. I don't know. Was it totally annoying to work with me as a first time screenwriter?
No, I enjoyed the process very much.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Is there anything else that you? Yeah, I don't know. Big lessons that you're going to take into your next feature?
No, I mean, there are things. I mean, there are things that I'm excited about. Hopefully, some of the challenges that came up with this one, as far as time on set. There are things that you learn, that you try and remedy, maybe, like, and this is something a lot of filmmakers talk about, I think, is that you want to have the time on set, and that's maybe more important than the camera or a lens or an expensive blank. But that time, by having the time to work with the actors and to work with what you have, more time is very valuable, maybe more so than some other expensive thing, like, all those things. But that may be it.
Just more time. Have more time.
Yeah. Yeah. Prioritize having time, because, that's when you start to play. And when you're playing, and the actors have more takes, and you have more time to, attempt ambitious shots or whatever it is, that time is very valuable. And it's something that if you don't have, you're extremely limited, but, having a better camera or a different cast or better location, that's important too. But if you had to choose, maybe those extra days might be worth it.
Yeah. Maybe one other follow-up question is like, were there limitations that you were grateful for, where you were like, oh man, if we didn't have that limitation, X, Y, or Z wouldn't have happened, and it wound up being an interesting part?
Yeah, there was some day. There was one day. It had some real scheduling challenges, and it had to do with daylight hours and night hours and how long we wanted to stay at a location. And we winded up really rushing. And that meant losing a bunch of shots that I would have loved to have gotten at the time, but then later found out that I didn't need. So it was like, that obstacle ultimately worked out great.
Yeah.
But at the time it was really frustrating.
Yeah. Because you don't know what you need until
you really don't know. And thematically, like what we winded up losing were a lot of exteriors or a lot of setup shots, and it was a driving scene. So they were kind of complicated and hard to get in the first place, and not having them kind of made the scene more intimate. And I would, if I had those shots, I know they would have been in the movie. So it kind of worked out. The obstacle of rushing
gave it a little more of the right flavor.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool.
It's been great talking with you, Rob.
Great talking. Let's do it again
I'd love to see your furry face.
Yeah, we should do it again soon.
Yeah.